In August and September 2014, a pair of murders shook the journalism world to its core. American journalists James Foley and Sotloff were killed at the hands of ISIS militants.
The Foley and Sotloff killings were a really, really harsh wake-up call for the media, for the international media, and for folks who are working on freedom of expression, on journalist safety.
The murders of Foley and Sotloff set off important changes in how journalists and news outlets approached safety in conflict zones.
It was sort of it's now or never. We have to do something because we can't possibly let this go any further than it's gone.
But before the murders became a watershed moment in war reporting, the environment for the press was already going through dramatic changes.
Larger media organizations were the only ones for many years that had the resources to be able to cover foreign wars. But what happened is the economics of the news business have changed. A lot of news organizations began to shrink their foreign bureau network and relied more and more on local journalists and international freelancers to fill in those gaps in coverage.
Those freelancers were often courageous, versatile reporters, but lacking access to the resources of a large news outlet began to pose serious problems.
Most freelancers did not have access to training, hostile environment and first aid training, to insurance, to personal protective equipment, and to the kinds of planning strategies that you need to go into a war zone or a hostile environment. They just didn't have it.
And as the business and technology of news was shifting, another crucial problem was that the political realities of conflict reporting began to shift as well.
Up until very recently, journalists had been seen as neutral observers, sort of a tool to be able to tell what's going on. In that way, it protects them. But that's changing.
The journalists were no longer the intermediary. So the journalist became the story. Before that, journalists could be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They could literally step on a landmine or they could get caught in crossfire. The ISIS kidnappings showed us that capturing a journalist was the story. So these journalists were walking around with great big targets on their back. And that's what happened with a number of journalists, including Jim Foley and Sotloff.
What became evident is that we needed to really roll up our sleeves and be able to directly work with freelancers to provide them with resources that were not available to them.
CPJ and partner organizations responded by forming a culture of safety, an alliance of news outlets, freelancers, and press freedom nonprofits that cooperate to provide freelancers and conflict reporters the resources, tools, and training they need to stay safe.
Slowly but surely, we're getting to a point where more freelancers know about this kind of training and are able to get the training that they need in order to report from the front lines.
Since the murders of Jim and Stephen, freelancers have really taken more ownership of the risks that they run. They really have stepped up to look after themselves better. So the trend is one of improvement, but there's still a long way to go. I think we have a moral obligation to help journalists like Jim and Stephen, because what motivated them was the desire to tell the story of the victims of war, to tell the stories of the ordinary people who were caught between these forces. And I think it's up to us to make sure that just because they were courageous and wanted to tell stories, that they shouldn't have to pay such a terrible price for that very noble impulse.